And as a consequence of that, we have this foreign exchange constraint. But that is only one reason why a developing nation might not be able to grow. And Harrod-Domar, HD, they look at another constraint, and we have talked about this before. So, Ellie, what's another constraint for the developing nations, particularly the peoples within the developing nations? No, so we're thinking about it's to do with money, really.
They don't have the financial sectors in developed, so they can't borrow.
Okay, so we're getting close to it. So JM's just mentioned about they don't have the developed foreign sectors, so that's true. And what would go into the developed foreign sector? If they had one, what would go into it? What would households be expected to put into it?
Savings.
Right, okay. So Harrod-Domar is all to do with the fact that in reality they don't have the wherewithal to save, never mind have any savings. So they don't have any place to put their savings. Might put it under the mat at the door, so because they don't have the financial markets in place. But secondly, Ellie, yes, they're in absolute poverty. How can you expect them to save, Ellie? How can you expect them to save? They're in absolute poverty. So the Harrod-Domar growth model is to do, it's not a foreign exchange constraint, it's a savings constraint. Now, we need to sort of pick apart why savings are important. So if you think of your bank, and you rock up to your bank, and then you throw some savings in it, so assuming that a country might have a developed financial sector. So money goes into the bank account, savings, you save your money. The bank doesn't want to sit on that money, why not? Because
they get more interest back.
Yeah, they want to use your money to make it work for them. So they want to make some money on that. So with your savings, you're quite right, they'll hopefully do what? Okay, so the loans will come, yeah. Okay. And who might they lend to?
Businesses, other people.
Firms, particularly. Thinking about firms particularly in this instance. So loans go out, and what are the firms going to do with it? Okay, so we're going to have investment as a consequence of that. Okie dokie. And that investment, JM, you've already mentioned, might take the form of buying capital. So we call that capital accumulation. Okay. And capital accumulation, or investment, so we've got AD, C to the I to the G to the X minus M. So if you've got this increased investment, Ellie, what's going to happen to AD? AD is going to increase. Okie dokie. And as a consequence? Yeah. So you're going to have economic growth. And then what will that enable your residents to do? And save more, and so the cycle continues. So this is kind of a virtuous circle. Now we haven't quite expressed it here in the terms of the textbook, so I'll put up sort of what your standard textbook nomenclature would be on this. But is that okay, Megan, Alana? Don't know if you can see this or not.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
You in the same house?
No.
Right, so the textbook explanation of it would be, I like to just write it like this: savings leads to investment, leads to growth. That's a very simplistic way of thinking about it. Savings leads to investment, leads to growth. S leads to I, leads to EG, economic growth. That's the way I remember it. But in terms of your standard textbook diagram, what you'll see is they have savings leading to investment. So not mentioning firms or anything at this point, leading to capital accumulation. And then you'll see they sort of break down the economic growth. So rather than saying economic growth, what they talk about here is output and employment. And then back again. So I think a very obvious thing that you could say here at this point is, what's Harrod-Domar saying? He's saying that developing nations will not be able to grow. Why? Because because there is a savings constraint. And what's the problem with that? Well, if you do not have enough savings, you do not get any investment, you then do not get the increases in output and employment. And therefore, if you were to illustrate that by way of a diagram, Megan, let's go to our guests zooming in. So Megan, what would the impacts of the savings constraint be on ADAS?
Would AD... No.
Well, I is a component of AD, isn't it?
Yeah. But if there's no savings, then there's no investment.
That's true. But what about the machinery that you're using and it's wearing out because it depreciates?
Can it not be replaced?
Not if you've no savings.
So would AS shift to the left?
AS would absolutely shift left, yeah. So you'd have an LRAS1 shifting to LRAS2. Okay. Anything else?
AD would either stay where it is or shift very, very slightly to the right.
To the right. We know that AD is C to the I to the G to the X minus M, don't we?
Yeah.
So if I investment, so the amount of investment in the economy is actually, it's going to drop because you're not saving any money, therefore you cannot invest.
Oh, okay. Shift to the left.
So it's going to go left. So this impacts not only your sort of your short-term economic growth of AD, but also your longer-term as well, AS. Okay, now, unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as that. Because less developing nations and the people who are in government of developing nations, they appreciate that this is a problem. Therefore, they've come up with some solutions to ask to certain, we call these sort of, 1, 2, 3, and 4. They have come up with their own kind of homegrown, homebrewed solutions, if you will, to 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. But then these subsequently have their own problems as well. So if I was to say to you, Ellie, the less developing nations, they appreciate they don't have enough money coming in. They appreciate that they cannot save maybe as much as they want. How would they go about plugging that gap? Plugging the savings constraint, or the savings gap as it is actually called sometimes.
Like encouraging other people to save.
Who? Ellie said encouraging other people to save. Go on. What do you mean? How would that benefit them though?
Because then you have the savings in the banks.
Okay, well, why would they? Okay. I'm not sure that's a goer, that one. What were you going to say?
Couldn't they borrow from other countries?
Right, okay. Good, yeah. So one way that you can plug this is you might decide, right, well, let's borrow. As every nation in the land is doing at the minute. But on the flip side of that, any problems borrowing? Right. So borrowing. So we're going to sort of do the rebounds of these. So you could borrow. Of course you could borrow. Most countries can borrow. But lots of problems. So number one would be, JM? Yeah, interest rates. So you're not going to be AAA credit status like the UK. You're going to have to pay an arm and a leg in terms of interest. So the interest rate payments will be very punitive.